Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jason Jacobs, and I am a Director of Product Development for BeechNut. I'm also in charge of Consumer Relations and Regulatory. As a member of the Cornell Institute of Food Systems Industry Partnerships, I'm pleased to introduce this panel this afternoon. Innovation through interconnection, maximizing feedback impact. Dave Borbano, professor in food science at Cornell, will moderate what will no doubt be a lively back and forth between Professor Mike Van Amberg of Animal Science and Marina von Keyserlingk, NSRC Industrial Research Chair and Professor of Animal Welfare at University of British Columbia. Their work in the dairy sector demonstrates how establishing a connection between current industry practices and the process of scientific research, as well as reaching out for consumer input and feedback, can drive innovation. Nina's work, for example, involves improving cattle housing in ways that promote animal health and the management of major transitions in the lives of cattle at weaning, parturition, and at the end of lactation. Mike's work focuses on several areas related to productive efficiency of dairy cattle on a lifetime basis, along with the environmental impact of producing food from cattle, all from a systems perspective. Let's see what happens when these two experts sit down together. Please join me in welcoming the panel for an engaging discussion.
Good afternoon. I'm Dave Barbano, and I'm kind of coordinating this and have my two speakers here. The title of the session is Innovation Through Interconnection, Maximizing Feedback Impact. So we've got two speakers that are going to each give a short presentation, and we're going to focus on two topics. Now, we realize the audience is very diverse. The three of us are dairy with a capital D, so I know most of you are not dairy, but the issues we face in dairy are really very similar to issues that are faced across the food industry, from production through consumer. And want to use these two examples or two topic areas to kind of draw the situation in dairy, but draw you into the discussion with examples or sort of conundrums in the science-consumer interface. I've asked each of them then to make a short presentation, and then after each presentation we'll have some questions and then wrap up with some questions together and discussion. So first, Nina is going to go first, and her topic is the citizen perspective. Do dairy cattle have a good life?
Thank you, Dave. We have the illustrious position of right after lunch to try and keep you awake. And so I just at the outset want to say that Mike and I are really good friends. So we look at the world very differently, but we're really good friends. And we're really hoping that that we actually can, with all of you, it's not just a discussion between him and I, but it's also a discussion between him and I and you guys. So I just want to say I do a lot of work. Most of my work is in the natural sciences. I'm trained as a natural scientist, but have been working in the field of animal welfare now for over 15 years. And what I began to realize very quickly is that animal welfare is not just about the animals. It's also about the people and their values. So I've titled this The Citizen's Perspective, Do Dairy Cattle Have a Good Life? And this is a question that has been coming more and more to the forefront when people are confronted with situations where they see food animal products. And so it's not just about whether or not a product is organic versus conventional. They want reassurances that these animals have had a reasonably good life. So to start out, I just wanted to give you just a recap of sort of the definition of animal welfare that we use. It's been around for nearly 20 years. My colleague David Fraser published this paper in 1997. And really, there's three concepts. For an animal to have good welfare, it needs to have biological functioning and good health. And this is something to think about from the perspective of the farmers and veterinarians. This is where the focus has been in terms of research over the last 50 years. It's about keeping animals healthy, making sure that the systems are working properly within that animal. That's been the emphasis. However, people that walk into the grocery store, they assume that the food in there is healthy. That it wouldn't be there if it wasn't. Well, not necessarily healthy. It's safe. Some things are less healthy than others. But they assume that. But what we're seeing is a growing understanding from people that are not involved in agriculture is that they value this thing called natural living. And I'll talk about this more. But there's also reassurances that the animal didn't suffer. And this speaks to the emotional side of animals. And this gets really hard when it comes to science. This one's better? No. It's very small. Okay, no worries. Okay, so so in different sectors of society place different emphasis on each of these circles. Ultimately, from the perspective of where we come from in science, of course, if we can come up with solutions that hit the sweet spot in the middle, then we've got, hopefully, the welfare looked after. Okay, Dave has charged us with bringing up, or he gave us the example. I have to say, in terms of picking an example, this one is way, way out there. And that is cow-calf separation. It's one that we know from our research that the majority of the public doesn't even know that this happens. Okay, so how many of you know that when a cow has a baby, that the calf is taken away right at birth? A good chunk of you. Well, you guys are more than the average. On average, only about 25% of people that are out there that are not involved in dairy industry have any recollection of this. When they think of a cow having a baby, this is their picture. This is the story that the dairy industry has to sell. The calf is taken away from the cow immediately. It is, for the most part, although work that Mike's been doing, work we've been doing, we're trying to change this, but for the most part, it is put into a hutch or into a barn, an individual pen, and essentially socially reared in isolation. We've got lots of research now that shows that there's cognitive deficits, learning challenges with these calves, but this is essentially what the dairy industry has to sell. So I just want to highlight two projects. These are just in the list of some of my graduate students right now that are working in this sort of interface between sort of public attitudes, citizen attitudes, and dairy cattle welfare. Clarissa Cardoza did a project called Imagine the Ideal Dairy Farm, U.S. Citizens Perspective, and I'm going to show you just a brief results from that. Beth Ventura did her entire PhD on understanding industry and lay perspectives on the dairy cattle welfare, and I'll show you one result from her experiment. Jesse Robbins is looking at farm animal welfare in general and trying to look at what are the barriers to creating a trustworthy industry. And there's some huge challenges, what we're seeing now, in terms of trust in the food supply coming from citizens out there because of the perceptions of what they think agriculture does, and then what happens when they realize that it doesn't happen that way. And we've got these disconnects. And Christine Sumner is looking at this from the other side, is trying to understand farmers and what are the barriers to change. Okay, so Clarissa asked, what do you consider to be an ideal dairy farm and why are these characteristics important to you? She sampled 468 American citizens, and essentially, in a nutshell, what her work showed is the good quality of treatment to the cow, which includes access to pasture and space to roam, is vital. Healthy cows produce healthy and safe products. There was an absolute rejection of chemicals and hormones for the purpose of improving milk production, or production per se. But if the cow was sick, you better treat her. And that was tied to high-quality products and good for human health. Modern is viewed as good. The agriculture industry generally, if they put themselves in the place of their consumer, the citizen, believe that what they want is the little red barn with 3 cows. That is not what our sample showed us. They absolutely believe in modern. They want the farm to be efficient and profitable. And lastly, there was definitely an interest in organics, but it seemed to be stemmed in part to the conception that the other uses hormones and antibiotics for improving milk production. So one of the things that agriculture has frequently said, look, all I have to do is educate the public. And if I can educate the public, if I can educate Mike to my way of thinking, then of course he'll believe me, right? So there's definitely that. So does access to knowledge shift perceptions about the current dairy cattle care practices? That was one of Beth's PhD questions. So you see all these bicycles. This is the Slow Food Tour that goes through our region every year. So we have 600 foodies, people interested in food that come and visit the dairy. So she took 50 of those, and she basically gave them a knowledge test about different aspects of the dairy farming. Certain things they knew, certain things they didn't. And then what she did is she looked at what were the things that bothered them, or what were their perceptions about the dairy industry. So there, before she did all this, then they went on a tour of the dairy, they got information, they got knowledge, and then she asked them again. So the things that came up before, they were very worried that the animals had good food. They were very worried that the cows, about pasture and outdoors. And pasture and outdoor access is going to come up again and again. They were very concerned about behavior restriction. And this has also been shown in other aspects. People don't like animals to have little space. And they were very concerned about abuse. So when you looked at the values, there was a very strong weighting on biological functioning, a strong weighting, much more so than actually science recognizes, is in natural living. Naturalness is important. They don't always know what it is, but they know when they don't see it. And about 22% brought up issues about sort of pain, suffering, things like that. There was also this overarching desire that the people looking after the animals had to be qualified, this human care element. So when you ask them, so one of the things she asked is, how confident do you think that dairy cattle have a good life? Before, about 42% of them were reasonably confident that these cows had a good life. 30% neutral, 28% non-confident. Here's some perceptions improved after visiting, so then they went on their tour. Before, I'm concerned about humane treatment, cramped living conditions, access to grazing. So this was a comment from somebody before the tour. This is the comment after the tour. The animals seem to be well cared for. The practices on this farm seem very ethical. So in this case, their perceptions had been this, and they had gained confidence that actually it wasn't so bad. Some perceptions worsened. Discovered new issues or existing concerns reinforced. Absolute shock from about 75% of the people that cows are separated from their calves. Lack of pasture access, space, hygiene. Before, somebody said, I don't have any concerns. After, I would still prefer to see animals grazing in the fields, eating the grass, and calves not separated so quickly from their mothers. And when you ask them after the tour, what you see is the biggest drop of nearly a 50% drop in confidence that the animals had a good life. It wasn't what they thought. So these are things that the dairy industry has to live with. So overall, participants, were pleased to see the high level of attention, but they were displeased, particularly about cow-calf separation and access to pasture. We've done a number of different studies. Access to pasture is something that the citizens value, and they don't like it when they don't see it. Is this the future of the dairy industry? So this is a farm in Germany where the farmer has made the decision that These cows produce 40 kilos of milk. I'll give 10 kilos to the calf, and I'll keep 30 for myself. Would this satisfy the citizen? I don't know, because I think in their mind, this is what they see. So in terms of the key results from our research and our latest calf research is people expect humane care and appropriate hygiene and husbandry. People place great emphasis on the natural living component. They see cows as having pasture access and being with her calf. Clearly, practices that resonate with societal values will be more sustainable because educating the public is not going to work. Calves are motivated for social contact. I haven't shown you this, but what we do know is that individual housing is something that we predict the citizen will not like. We haven't actually asked that question, but I predict they won't like it. We also now on the natural science show that calves that are individually housed have cognitive deficits and have learning challenges. Less is known about effects of early separation on a cow or how the cow-calf groups can be practically managed. Over to you, Mike.
Okay. So I'm going to say this a couple different ways. So Nina and I do know each other quite well. We are good friends. I take the science side because she's right. We're going to have a really hard time convincing the consumers that the dairy is right. But at the same time, as we learn things, we start to convince the dairy producers that there's something they have to change and it's for their benefit, right? But it's a hard, slow road. Because cows, what are cows? Creatures of habit. What are dairy farmers? They're creatures of habit, right? And the best thing that you do for cows is the same thing with cows and and you're very happy to produce a cow. But there's so much more to talk about going here. What I tried to do is kind of balance out what I thought Nina was going to say. I didn't know exactly what she was going to show your slides and so this now. But I'm also going to play off this concept of big data, because I think this is one of the hard things that, at least in the agriculture, I grew up a dairy farmer, 50 cows on a pile. We had 59 cows, 50 cows are easy to manage, and calves, anything of this. But as farms get bigger and as we get better at thinking about natural systems, I am going to put up what Nina said, there are some things that we're not doing on dairies that I will agree with that we need to change. Okay, so I'm going to take that back. But I also think this is a real opportunity for the big data folks to help us figure out how to capture some of this. I was really involved with the talk by Amherst and by Robin, because that was quite intriguing to me as to how we actually capture some of that. I'd like Nick's opening talk because of how he captures all of that information. So, ladies and gentlemen, because I can project and help have that. But so where I'm going here is what does mom want for her offspring? Because there is some things relative to the big data aspect of this that I think farmers miss. So dairy farmers manage many biological systems and must do so in many ways. You know, the primary objective of all dairy farmers is to be low cost because they cannot control their price. Right? It's a function of the market. Right now, we're overproducing milk on a worldwide basis because we had such high prices last year, and we're overproducing by about 4%, 3 to 4%. Is that about right? Yeah, give or take. Chuck's maybe more. Yeah, it depends on what part of the world you're in. We're producing a lot more milk than we need, and the milk price, Germany's milk price right now is about 13 cents a pound or $13 a hundredweight. We're about 16. 2009 was a really bad year, and we got down to 12 and thought everybody was going to die. So, and the thing about the Germans is that the quota system's gone now, so they're really, really hitting the world market. They have to be financially sustainable. That's not the same as low cost, believe it or not. You can be low cost and still not be financially sustainable. We have to have good animal welfare. One, because we know that the better we treat animals, the more productive they are. The best example of an animal that doesn't have any stress is an animal that will make 120 or 150 pounds a day. She's actually quite happy. She's got plenty of good feed. She can lay down when she wants, right? Higher the production, the happier the cow, the lower the stress, right? And that's opposite of what a lot of consumers believe. And obviously, we got to have good environmental stewardship. You know, everybody's worried about nitrogen, phosphorus, and cow burps and farts. And I can't tell you how much I have to deal with methane production in cows. And I won't get into that now. Maybe when I summarize, because there's some things related to that that probably won't come up today. But, you know, New York especially has led the world, you know, I'll say in some regards. The Netherlands will say they probably led, but in terms of without penalty, we've led reducing nitrogen and phosphorus excretion in the environment. And I think that's something that all dairy producers have really started to focus on. Some of them, there's still some bad eggs out there. They're going to go away. All right? But dairy farmers are notoriously short-sighted when it comes to system thinking and life cycle analysis on a quantitative basis. They understand systems, and they understand things that happened a few years ago, but how do they gather all that together and really make quantitative, proactive decisions? It's really hard. They're task control oriented. I got to get so much done today, right? I just have to get my chores done, right? So it's really hard for them to think on a systems-based basis. They're budget-minded, you know, and they expect returns quite quickly. They'll do budgets. They'll do partial budgets until they're blue in the face, but then they expect it to pay back fairly fast, right? But they're looking mostly at short term. The hard part, and I think this is what I've heard in a bunch of other industries today, linking or knowing the true cause and effect of both positive and negative outcomes over multiple years is really, really difficult. And it's really hard for cows because we don't capture a whole lot of data. Geneticists will do this, but they are doing this in a way that still doesn't allow them to get to true cause and effect. And I've had worked with some geneticists where we've identified some things. One of those is what I'm going to share with you. All right, so low cost sometimes gets them in trouble and they don't know it. You know, we can't afford labor, we can't afford all these niceties, we can't change our practices, and it costs too much because they don't see the reward. It's hard to get to the reward. It's a missed opportunity that they didn't know they had. I see this all the time. They're stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. Okay, and that's just one of the things that happens. Requires a systems approach, farm level, what I call farm level big data. And we're starting to generate data with all sorts of different systems out there. Nobody knows what to do with it. Okay? And it's back to the calf thing. So a traditional calf program. So this is where Nina and I really got to know each other, was talking about some of the welfare related to calves, okay? Well, and there's a reason for this, and this gets back to why we isolate them. That has to do with disease transmission. We think that if we get them away from mom, who's full of all sorts of pathogens, and we get them isolated, that they're not going to exchange things, just like when your kids go to school, right? What happens when your kids go to school? My girls came back, well, it's not my girls. Kids came back to Cornell campus. I walk in, they're just snot-nosed as all get out, right? And the whole lecture, I got 72 kids in a lecture, and they're just, you know, and the next thing you know, I'm feeling the same way. Well, our idea was we're going to isolate the kids, or we're going to isolate the calves so they don't get sick, all right? The other thing we did, though, is minimize milk or milk replacer intake because it's costly, difficult to manage, and believed to contribute to illness. We got this crazy idea that if we fed them too much of what mom intended, that they were going to get sick. A lot of that just had to do with the fact that we weren't very good at managing, okay? Encourage dry feed intake to encourage rumen development. It's soon to be cheaper, easier to manage, right? Because if we didn't have to do all of this, we could just throw a bucket full of feed in front of them and they'll learn to eat it and everything will be fine. And this was all associated with reducing costs to keep the calf alive until a fully functioning ruminant. This was really our whole mission, was just keep them alive, okay? Is that good, positive welfare? And the answer is no. But the dairy producer doesn't see it that way. They see it as low cost. And that's where Nina and I have had all sorts of conversations as to how we're going to do this. It is the opposite of what the dam would do. Okay? So some of us a few years ago started asking the question, you know, because this is what you see if you see a big farm. And we started asking the question, is this good for the calf? Just like Nina. But we weren't looking at it from the welfare perspective. We were looking at it from, we decided to do this 40 years ago because we said it was going to be good for the calf and they'd not spread as much disease and all this other kind of stuff. But the real question was, does that impede the animal's ability to use her genetic capacity to be productive? So we asked that question. And this is where you get big data, right? And this isn't very big data, right? I only got 1,200 calves here, but I got 1,200 calves from one herd. I knew virtually everything about them, right? I knew everything from birth to calving. I knew what they ate. I knew what the environmental temperature was. I knew what their maintenance requirements were. I knew how many treatments they had, if they got treated for respiratory or scours or diarrhea or anything like that. I had all this information, my grad student and I. And what we were able to do then, and I'm dumbing this down a lot to go fast, is we looked at the effective growth rate prior to weaning as a predictor of first lactation milk production. So our hypothesis, simple hypothesis, this is what everybody can grab onto, treat them better as babies and they make better adults, right? That's not such a new idea. The question was, could we find any evidence of this? And in fact, what did we find? The answer was yes. For every pound of average daily gain per calf prior to weaning, they produced over 1,500 pounds more milk from the first lactation. That might not look like anything to somebody who doesn't look at milk production. When you select for milk production, genetically, how much milk do you get? You get 200 pounds per lactation. So feeding a calf better did what? 7 times that, right? Nature versus nurture. We had no idea, okay? So we've been breeding for this genetic capacity for all these years, and all of a sudden we figure out, hey, you know what? If you're going to breed them for genetic capacity, what do you got to do with them? You got to feed them and manage them for it, all right? So we've lost opportunity. But for a dairy farmer, this is big data because you got to know everything about that calf from the moment they're born, okay? So this is all published. We've had a lot of fun with this. So life cycle analysis of early nutrition demonstrates improved productivity as an adult. You know, does the dairy industry pay attention to this? Oh, heck yeah. They know how to adapt for this? The answer is no, because it means that they got to go away from everything that Nina was talking about and that I've been talking about is we got to get out of those hutches, we got to go back to something that's more group housing, and we got to change the way we do this. Reduced growth for any reason results in unrealized increase in profitability. We don't have a system on a farm that actually allows us to capture something like this. Okay, the data is missing. The data systems are missing. Right now, are we changing? I'll say yes in defense, just so Nita can jump in here and Dave will beat us up shortly. So I am strongly encouraging dairy producers to build new facilities. This is one of those such facilities. You know, I'm a nutritional physiologist and engineers don't like it when we build buildings, but you can see, so this is a calf barn, Washington County, Ideal Dairy. Calves have blankets on them, they got good bedding, they got lots of drainage, they got lots of airflow, they got a ball to play with. Nina, you see that? We got a ball in there for them to play with. All right.
Is it natural for them to play with a ball?
We have, I'm just about done.
Okay.
Wait a minute here. We have this thing called a robotic feeder. This is beautiful because they can eat as much as they want all day long, just like mom. Okay? And that's what it looks like on the inside. That thing mixes milk replacer, sends it out to the nipple, reads the calf. The calves can eat as they want, and they're quite happy. And I will recognize, and this is what we want them to do. Again, it's going to take a long time. Do you realize the investment of building something like this for a dairy? This is crazy. These guys make a lot of money. They have high-powered cattle, so it was easier for them to be able to do this. They've got multiple barns for safety, right? But when you have these guys in group situations, they're quite happy and they're quite productive. And this is really what the future is. But it's going to take us a long time to get there. And my preference would be that the consumer doesn't drive this, that we drive it internally, right? Is that it? Okay, so I'll stop there.
Thank you, Michael. Why don't we, if we start from the audience, if there's some questions, otherwise I have some questions too. That's one right in the back.
I'm curious, because it's not my field, when you describe that the calves that are raised in isolation have cognitive deficiencies, what does that mean in practical terms? I just don't know.
I'm going to show you a video, okay? Because
She was waiting for that
I
question.
was waiting for it.
You're her hero for this
Yes.
afternoon.
I'm not an expert on this part. How do I get? I want to get to my other present. Oh, he's coming. I'll answer that. I'll answer it and I'll get you to show you the video. So what does it mean in practical terms is that I'm going to show you a video sec in terms of the learning outcomes, but we also know that they're much more, what we call, have much higher rates of food neophobia. And Mike's ball, an individual house calf would really, really be stressed out by that ball. So much, and so we don't know the long term, but we also think that they're probably have more challenges in terms of learning how to use the milk parlor. And anything that changes is a real challenge. Anyways,
Need to make sure.
Extra, Nina, the second one.
extra. The second one. I'm just so, this video is so cool. So, here how do I make it go big? I have a Mac, so I don't know how to use this. Just play the slideshow. Okay, we did an experiment where we kept cows and calves together. We compared their learning tasks. They weren't allowed to, okay. No, that's okay. I'll move it. I'll move it. Sorry. So we cows and calves could nose touch, and then we put bras on the cows. Okay? And then we compared individual housing, and then we made them play a game. So we taught the calves that they had to nose touch, and then they could get a milk reward. And there's calves that were raised with their mom and raised by themselves. This calf, red was go, white was no go. So when the screen turned white, he wasn't allowed to go. So all calves can learn how to play that game. Okay? So that's not a problem. So it takes them, there's 2 sessions a day, and so over 7 days, they all learned how to play the game. And then what we did is we changed the rules. So they had to, if white was go, now red was go. So they had to do the opposite. This is socially housed calves. It took them a day and a half, and all of a sudden it's like this light bulb went on. Boom, I get it. These are individually housed calves. They just couldn't get it. And the students took them out for 2 weeks longer, and they couldn't get it. They continually went back to baseline. And so you hear some dairy producers say, I've got cows, I've got a parallel parlor, so cows can go either into the left or to the right hand of the parlor. And you've got cows that only go into the left. And as soon as you try to get them to go into the right, they freak out. This could be a case where, in the one case, they have to turn to the right, and the other case, they have to turn to the left. And they have, and this, they basically what we say cognitive, they're inflexible. So and this has been shown in the 60s in non-human primates, in the 70s and 80s in rodents, and now this is the first evidence of it in a farm animal. That's my video. Your call.
Yeah, so we transition and our heifer aspirations from individual group meeting with replacement. And what we saw was we do weight gain trials, take weights, and the rate of gain after weaning, because at weaning they were put in groups, and the weight gain after weaning was much better after they were reduced than when they were individuals, even though they both sort of went into a group at the same time. Yeah. So we think that they went through the transition better. But we don't know whether that's because when they were housed individually, they were only fed twice a day, and when they were in a group, they didn't anytime. So was it the social part of it, or was it the transition in terms of eating twice a day?
I can answer this. I'll try anyhow, then you can answer. So that's a really good point, Craig. So here's what we think that is now. They learned where do y'all learn to eat from? Who teaches you what food is? Your mom, usually. All right? Calves don't have their mom. That's part of the argument we're going to have here, right? But a group that, just like she just showed, they all learn to eat better, and they all learn to eat faster. And when you're a single calf and you look at that bucket, and we know that stuff in the bottom is food, and that calf has absolutely no idea what that stuff is. So they go and they look at it and go, I don't know. And they go back and they eat the milk because they know what milk is or milk replacer is, but they have no idea what that is. So when you've got groups of calves, they teach each other how to do this, and you get a slightly older calf really teaches a bunch of young calves how to do that. I am trying to get, again, back to herd behavior. Mom would normally teach them how to eat. They don't have moms, so we got to come up with a better strategy, and I think that's going on, Craig. And so the transition's a heck of a lot easier.
I can just add one point to that. So we've actually done the behavioral work, is that calves that were individually housed and then transitioned into a group pen versus calves that were pair housed, so just a small group, transitions into a group pen, and there's a grain feeder that they'd never used before. Individual calves took 2 days before they had the first meal. Pair housed calves took 7 hours. So they're used to watching others, as Mike said. So we've shown that.
Nina, in your title, you use the word the citizen's perspective. If we use the word public, consumer, citizen, are they all the same, or how would you view them differently in relation to the topic?
Okay, so to me, the word public is sort of a bit overarching. I'll spend most of my time of the way we define citizen and define consumer. To me, the consumer is what you do when you walk into the grocery store. So you, as the one individual showed this morning, the big grocery store, there's 1,000, or maybe there was 10,000 things that they choose from, and they make choices. What consumer purchasing behavioral research shows, broadly speaking, is that people make choices based on price primarily. And a lot of the time it's because, you know, you can imagine a young mom with 2 kids, and I remember trying to go with my 2 boys to the grocery store, and I've got, let's take eggs, and I've got 10 different types of eggs in front of me, from cheap to most expensive. My kids are screaming, I got 2 seconds to make a decision. The only thing I really know is that these are cheaper than those. The citizen, and so that's the consumer. And one of the challenges that agriculture has is that we have constantly said, we will not change practice until we can get out of that low-cost formula, right? Until the consumer pays for it. And so we're in this dilemma because the consumer doesn't pay, so the farmer doesn't change practice. Well, that's to me now where we have to talk about the citizen. We each have 2 personas. We have the consumer when we go buy something, but we also have the citizen, and as a citizen, we have attitudes. We allow values to come in to make our decisions. And it's as citizens that we vote. And what's interesting about the animal welfare topic is that it is going into the legislative arena. So there are laws being made about animal welfare. The one that was affected the food animal industry the most was in 2008 when you guys elected Obama the first time. California had Proposition 2. And Proposition 2 was animals shall be housed in such a way that they can fully extend their wings and limbs, turn around 360 degrees, and not touch another animal or touch any housing. United Egg Producers, because there's a big egg industry in California, they have cages, put like $9 million in anti-Prop 2 advertising, saying the price of eggs is going to go up by 50 or 100%. 70% of Californians voted yes to that. It had nothing to do with price. So that's the new reality when it comes to animal welfare. It is becoming something that is in the legislative playground. And so this puts farmers in a really challenging position. And I agree with Mike. I think the farming community has to be careful because if they don't get ahead and we don't help science guide policy, laws are going to be made that may not be good for animals, may not be good for farmers.
Other questions? Switching the topic a little bit, in the dairy industry, we also have cultures, fermented products, and microorganisms. We can do things to make them more productive, produce different compounds. And again, what does the consumer think of that, of how we do it? I think there's a lot of examples when you start to get into a whole food system where the interface with consumers and understanding more and having techniques to actually collect some feedback in terms of opinion, not on the marketing side, but on the attitude side about practices, because they turn into legislation. I think that's something across the whole industry that we have to really start taking more into consideration. I personally, through all this 15 years ago, went through bovine somatotropin and was a lightning rod for a lot of that. So I still have some of the scars from that. But what we do in production agriculture, the practices that we have, we really have to start thinking with the communication that we have today, with the accessibility. Everyone has a phone that's a camera that in an instant can be recording what they see. So we really have to think about that in relation to what we do and that it's going to be much more visible going forward, and we're going to be questioned a lot more about how we do in producing food. I think this isn't exclusive to animal agriculture. We have all the same things with plant production, particularly when we come into issues that happen because of practices and we have some sort of food safety outbreak. All of a sudden, it's really front-page news. So I think all of that connects with this interconnecting and understanding what's important to the consumer. Do we have any other questions, comments? Yes.
What's the public's view of both methane production and dairy production? Because they go hand in hand, right? A lot of cows produce a lot of methane. So it's kind of different for those who are using climate control versus milk.
So I'm not an expert on the environmental side. I have done a study in collaboration with Catherine Knowlton at Virginia Tech. She comes from that environmental side. She's a natural scientist, and she did a sabbatical with me where we asked the question of, again, U.S. citizens, where we put them in basically in a dilemma situation. So antibiotic residues are a challenge, and the environmental impact is a challenge. So this has less to do with methane, but so we gave them a scenario where a cow was sick. And if the farmer treated her, there's a chance she could a very good chance she could get better. However, Catherine's work says that if you give a cow an antibiotic, that 80% of it goes out in the pee and goes out into the environment. So what should the farmer do? Should he treat the cow or not? And to me, it humbled me. There was lots of so people had to write, and we did a theme-based analysis of that. But what the overarching thing that came back was, one, they were definitely worried about the quality of life for cows, but they were very nuanced in their answer. And basically they came back, well, absolutely you should treat the cow, but surely you can catch the urine. It's not rocket science here, but surely you can do that. So I think it's those sort of trade-offs.
So can I just follow that up real quick?
Yeah, you can talk about the methane.
Yeah, I can do that a lot, actually, more than anybody wants to hear. So I actually want to get to that. I had that slide set, and maybe I'm going to come back to that when I summarize, because I think the biggest problem that we have is everybody who's focused on the cow and methane is focused on the cow. We don't eat the cow. We drink the milk. So the question is, per unit of milk produced and per 8-ounce glass of milk to satisfy the requirements for calcium and phosphorus and all that kind of stuff for a kid, what's the greenhouse gas opportunity or penalty? And what's the alternative, and is it any better when you put it on that basis? And right now, the biggest problem that we have is that we keep talking about, this is partly where I wanted to go, but that wasn't what our charge was, is that we are focused on the wrong thing. We need to be focused on, we produce food for humans for nutrient supply. Per unit of nutrient supply, what is the best food for that particular food group? When you do that, milk looks pretty darn good. Beef doesn't look too bad, actually, when you put it on a micronutrient basis, because it's really hard to get some of the things we have in meat. So what I'd like to do is change that entire conversation to be more systems focused on, we do this to produce food, and not focus on the cow, okay? And I could get into a lot more detail, but we're all screwed up about that.
You had a question? Oh.
Feed additives that would reduce the methane emissions from the cow, would that be?
Yeah, you know what the problem is? All right, great question. What about the feed additives that reduce methane? Well, they reduce methane because they have antimicrobial activity. They reduce the methanogens in the rumen. Well, guess what? That makes it an antibiotic, and what does nobody want in their food? Antibiotics. The problem is that class of compounds has no real antibiotic activity the way we talk about fluoroquinolones and penicillin and all that kind of stuff. But the way FDA does it, it's all pooled in the same place. So all of you would believe that if we feed Rumensin or we feed this new alcohol extract or derivative that really knocks down methane, that that's an antibiotic grade feed, right? Additive. And we can't do that because consumers don't like it. So boy, that drives me crazy because you got to spend so much time on education, but then they say, well, the FDA must be right. That's the government, and they put everything in the same pot, right? Well, no, they didn't do that right. It's a real problem.
Maybe I can say something too on that methane issue. You can express methane, total methane output. You can express methane for milk, but then actually per pound of fat or per pound of protein produced from the cow, if you wind up producing a lot less of fat and protein, which are the really high value nutrients from the milk, with about the same amount of methane, we've actually increased the methane production. We really have to be careful about the metrics that we use to decide which way we're going.
I lead the development of a nutrition model, and that's exactly, a nutritionist when formulating a diet for a cow now can do exactly what Dave said. We can balance per unit of either fat, protein, energy-corrected milk, you name it, right on the spot, and we can solve those problems. But the problem is, back to Nita's point, who pays for that? Are you guys going to figure out how to get a few more cents per pound for milk or cheese to get that back to the producer so they can afford to make some of the changes? And that's where we're stuck right now. Now we can go there.
Okay.
We have one more question.
This is a very nice question. Organic farming or organic skills. In general, I tell the consumer's impression is the other end of the spectrum, meaning the cows are fully living in the pasture and the cows are with their mothers. Is that not correct then?
It's partially correct. So, basically, cows, there is a requirement for cows to be out on pasture. She's telling me to stop, so can I finish the question? So cows do have, at certain times of year, there can be a pasture requirement. Yes. However, in actual, from my world, there's some great things about organics, and there's some huge tension with animal welfare. Because you got to remember, organic is a holistic approach. And you guys are the only country in the world where if a cow is in the organic system and she's treated with an antibiotic, she can no longer go in that system. You're the only country whose organic standards are strict like that. Nearly all the other countries, Canada and Europe, have taken a very more pragmatic approach. So there's drug withdrawal periods, and they're whatever it is. And all the other countries basically coalesced around 3 times that. So if it's a 50-day withdrawal period, you now cannot put the milk of that cow in the supply for 150 days. From an animal welfare perspective, what we get a lot is farmers hoping that the cow will get healthy on her own. And so we get withholding of treatment. And it's a huge challenge from an animal welfare perspective. And that's the problem with organic. So we see a lot of very ill cows. And I get it from the farmer's perspective. He gets way more milk and he has this hope that she'll spontaneously recover. But it doesn't always work.
We'll wrap it up there. Thank you to Mike and me.